Okay, so our next two speakers are Alex Deng and B. Bond, and from University of Leeds, and they will be talking about what do considerations of pedagogy tell us about the profession and the practitioner.
You're on mute, Alex.
There you go, good start. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Does that look okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, just press share at the top right, and then it will be top right corner next to comments.
Oh dear, it's gone wrong. Hang on a
No,
second.
No, you just need to start. We can see. Just need to start from the, yeah.
You can do that as well. Yeah.
And then it's
and now it's the wrong way around. Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah. Fine.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm presenting this with B, who is a friend and a colleague. I'm very much hoping by the end of the talk she's still a friend, and I'm still employed at Leeds. I've got some preliminary remarks to make before we get fully into this, and I'm going to start with thinking about Bourdieu. He writes very, very eloquently about theory and what theory does. And with any theory, there is what he calls a surplus or excess of meaning. And that means that when we talk about something, when we have a theory, things escape us. We talk about more than we intend to. So what we're trying to do in this paper is capture what is revealed beyond when we talk about pedagogy. We disclose much more than we intend to, and we're interested really in that and how it relates to the profession practitioners. So our approach is kind of like a trope, really. It's fragments. We try to capture in a kind of scrapbook kind of way our observations, our thoughts, which are quite unpolished, our questions and hesitations around this question that we're investigating today, considerations of pedagogy and its implications and comments on the profession practitioner. So the lens we've adopted is very much a worldly one. In a way, what we're doing is looking away, but from pedagogy outwards, rather than looking at or into pedagogy. So many of the papers at this conference have focused so expertly on pedagogy and pedagogical concerns, and some of the ones that I've seen would include, for example, Letitia Monbeck, Ian Bruce, Steve Kirk, Maxine Gilway. They're just some that we've noted, but many of them have been expert in that respect. And we thought we would try to experiment with a very different approach to supplement but not replace the many excellent papers on pedagogy. So this is an experiment that could go wrong, but we hope not. Finally, as you no doubt know, in presenting our fragmentary and disparate thoughts on the practitioner profession through the lens of pedagogy, we focused on the critical, highlighting lacuna, drawing attention to what is perhaps implicit in many discussions of pedagogy, and our purpose is to provoke and to share with you our unpolished ideas. However, all our thoughts here have arisen from a primary and very long-standing concern with the teaching and learning entailed in the EAP for practitioners and students. So these are the sources we've drawn on for this talk. Interviews here means interviews for jobs, not interviewing people as part of this process. We've drawn on the annual reviews that we conduct with colleagues, staff meetings, CPD sessions, importantly, all of the informal conversations within and very much beyond the institution, which is why associations like Barley are so important to make us less parochial and see things in a much broader manner. Our observations in both senses of the word, observations of teaching, but also our general observations of the field. We've drawn also on the Barley mailing list and our own publications and scholarship. Just on that last note around our own scholarship and publications, we both have published, and it may not seem very apparent that we're talking about pedagogy, in what we've done, but they've all been inspired by the discussions and queries we have around pedagogy, even if it's taken us in a very different direction in the end. So in order to kind of make this talk make sense, we've had to classify, to order our puzzle, our thoughts, and we were faced with the question of how we do that, and also faced with the idea that all forms of classification are to a large degree arbitrary, again slightly influenced by my obsession with Bourdieu here. And as you go through it, you'll see that there are ways in which you could easily reconfigure that. So we've gone from the micro to the meso, which means the university level, right up to the macro. And B's going to talk about the micro and meso levels, and then I'll move on to talk about the macro. So I'll move on to the next slide and hand over to B.
Okay, so the mad arrows going in all directions, sort of, as I suppose, following on from what Alex has just said, suggests that we could start anywhere really with this, because it's all interconnected. What we decided to do was place the curriculum at the centre, because really we feel that this should be what drives our pedagogical choices. Also that the curriculum is framed around and embodies our understanding of pedagogy, and the curriculum should be a living document that we refer to in order to inform what we're going to do in the classroom. What we've both noticed over time is that over time that there's this, we've called it curriculum entropy, where the curriculum sort of loses the original purpose and understanding of it. And when we think about it, we've both been involved in the development of a number of new curricula, refreshing sort of previous curricula. And when we've done that, and when what we've seen as we've sort of observed through sort of external examining as well, is that the first iteration of it is based on shared agreed principles, drawing on collective knowledge base and understanding of the context that the curriculum's developed in, and it seems to work really well. At the point of development or refreshing, time and resources are put into it, and a lot of consideration goes into that curriculum and what it's aiming to achieve. But then over time, it slowly starts to erode and gets lost. And I think a lot of this is because of a continuing preoccupation that we have in EAP with materials, that partly because we're not working in isolation, we're working in collaboration, and we want students to have a similar experience, but the materials then seem to start to dictate the pedagogy rather than inform or support what we're supposed to be doing in terms of the principles. And when you get people taking over the leadership of a particular module, program, course, whatever we call it, the new module leader will look at the materials. And frequently I've had conversations with people and they've said, well, the materials don't make sense. It all needs rewriting. But there isn't any reference back to the original knowledge base, the original principles that the curriculum was based on. And then you get this kind of erosion. I think the materials are then, and what it makes me question is if the new module lead in the materials can't see the principles, then surely the teachers who are also working on it can't see the principles. And if that's what they're referring to, how are they going to then develop their own knowledge base, their own understanding of pedagogy? And I think both Alex and I feel that the curriculum should be the primary sort of driver for teacher development when there isn't time for anything else. So if we're talking about summer pre-sessionals, for example, where we have practitioners joining us who deserve to be developed, but it's quite time intense, the curriculum should be there as a sort of development for those practitioners. If the materials don't reflect the principles, then that's not going to happen. I think quite often materials are written with a focus on teachability, and at their worst, they're sort of seen as catering for the lowest common denominator in terms of students, but also that ongoing horrible kind of perception of summer tutors that join us not having the knowledge base and the experience and expertise that we would expect them to. the principles, the knowledge get watered down, get lost. How can we expect teachers to develop? So within all of these mad arrows, what I would like to have is almost a further arrow that almost shows the material sucking the life out of the principles and knowledge of the curriculum and removing the pedagogical autonomy of the practitioner to some extent. So this is kind of what we would talk about at the micro level of kind of curriculum, sort of the enactment of our pedagogy. That fits within a meso level. And when we think about the meso level, we think about the sort of center. Can you move the slide on, Alex? Yeah. And what we've got here is, I suppose, the scales are kind of trying to represent where centres perceive that they have or they don't have power and agency within the institution that they're part of. You can see which way we think it's tipping. So on the left, we've got where we kind of feel like centres feel like they do have some power. Most language centres, I think, make money, and we all see that as a positive thing in some ways, but there is danger, and that's why the money's on both sides. There's a danger in kind of this focus on money. Within institutions, we still, in Leeds, definitely, we're still talked of as in terms of being a pipeline or a cash cow. And that focus on the money making removes us, I think, from being part of the academic endeavour around student education. There is also the question of what if we don't make the money, which we might not be doing this year in particular, or if the institution starts to think that they could make more in some way from us. And I think that then moves us towards sort of issues around precarity and marginalisation. The money doesn't very often stay with the language centre, with the EAP unit. The pipeline kind of moves the money further away from us into cash poor language schools, central services, for example, so we don't actually have control over it. So we can't choose to invest it in scholarship, in staff development, which again prevents us from being able to participate in the wider academic endeavour, and stops our own pedagogy, our own teaching from sort of fitting within university drives for and suggestions that the teaching should be research led, should be research informed. So again, we're not fitting within the university and their understanding of student education. In contrast, where we do see ourselves as having power is there's talk frequently on the mailing list within centres and with other people about EAP teachers being good teachers. And we quite often separate ourselves out from the rest of the university in terms of teaching as good teachers. Discussions around what we call ourselves. People don't want to be called lecturers because we teach rather than lecture. And I don't like this sort of separation because it suggests that the rest of the university isn't interested in student education. They're not good teachers. And I think the further into the institution that you get, you see that that's not true. And I would also ask what evidence we're basing this on. Where is the evidence that we're good teachers? We observe each other, but where are we framing that? Where do we collect that information from? I was interested in the sort of the launch of Alex's Routledge series and the pedagogies book, and Jennifer MacDonald was saying that through the chapters that they've looked at, one of the things that they can see that is true of all EAP teaching within those chapters is that EAP teaching is student-centred. But I kind of think we need to move away from thinking about being student-centred to being learner-centred. So the talk, the first plenary around pedagogy of care, I think we fit within that. I'm going on for too long, aren't I, Alex? I realise. But we need to move away from that idea of a pedagogy of care that is only a pedagogy of care. If it's caring for students but without a focus on learning, without a focus on knowledge, we're not doing the students it's a disservice to the students. So we have power in that we build confidence, and that's how we evaluate students, through confidence. But what about the knowledge base? What about the learning that they're doing? So I'm going to stop there because I am running out of time and let you go on, Alex.
No, it's fine, Bea, honestly.
Okay, so I've just got some brief comments about the macro at the level of the profession. And I don't know if you probably, most of you probably didn't catch this, but Shona White from the University of Nice recently gave a plenary at the Giras conference in France, which is the equivalent of, kind of equivalent of Bali to a certain degree. And she was drawing kind of nice, interesting points around the legacy of EAP. And I'm going to start with what she focused on, which was the teaching focus part of this graphic. And she pointed out that learning has largely been overlooked, assumed, or claimed rather than demonstrated in EAP. And this needs redressing. So that goes back to B's point, especially in terms of how learning is taking place. As B mentioned, materials have dominated in quite a few talks at the conference. This conference, we've found out how students have responded to innovations in teaching, but there is kind of less focus on learning and understanding the learning that takes place. Interestingly, it maybe it's a legacy of Swales when he set up the first MA in ESP at Aston. He refused to incorporate aspects of psychology, SLA, and psycholinguistics. So it seems strange how a very local historical decision continues to kind of impact EAP today, where we don't really focus as much on those kind of elements within EAP as perhaps we should. I think as well, the cognitive is something that is also perhaps missing. I'm going to be slightly facetious, and I hope no one takes offense, but in SFL, LCT, and academic literacies, the mind is kind of absent, and cognition isn't particularly part of the frameworks, and so that sort of needs redressing to a large degree. The other aspect that hasn't really been prevalent for a long time is needs analysis, which seemed to be what one of the defining features of ESP and EAP. Have we heard much about needs analysis in this conference? It's difficult to say. It may well be implicit in many of the talks, and maybe I've missed those talks that have highlighted it, but it does nonetheless seem that needs analysis somewhat vanished as a priority. On the socialization level of the profession, we all know that we come into EAP with a wide range of experiences and qualifications, and our development, our habitus as practitioners occurs in situ. We learn to become practitioners by doing it. And this raises the question again of the micropolitics of EAP centres, where our development to some degree will be dependent on the culture of various centres, whether we're encouraged to develop, focus on pedagogy, develop our teaching in a collaborative environment. I don't want to labour that point, but I think you understand what I mean. Also in relation to the knowledge base, which is fragile to a degree, it's very text and context orientated around genre theories and academic literacies and SFL to a degree. This allows for innovations. We draw on many other sources of knowledge and other fields, and possibly dubious innovations. A very positive innovation, which I think will become an orthodoxy in EAP, is related to LCT. And that may occur, and if it does, then we also need to question it and challenge it, because LCT, to a degree, for it to develop, requires a critical engagement rather than a kind of passive one, if you like. dubious innovations are occurring at the moment with aspects of COVID, where digital innovations are becoming the mantras of universities, where we're hearing of disaggregation of content from lecturers, micro-credentials. There are all sorts of things going on in universities that we need to be very, very careful about in terms of digital innovation. I want to finish with the role of Barleap, in particularly in relation to its impact on the meso level, on the centre, on the university. Barleap can have an extremely positive influence around accreditation and fellowships, but the centres need to invite Barleap to intervene and have that positive impact. I know from B that at Leeds, Barleap has helped in the past secure, provide the centre with a better foundation. So that is important, but we also know that Barleap, like many associations, perhaps lacks the political punch and collective punch it could do in other areas. I also noted with B that the kind of prescriptive or orthodoxies around commutative genre-informed task-based approach needs questioning, and I think Jennifer and Carol's book does that. I'm going to finish rather abruptly with this and open it up to everybody. Ferguson maps out a heuristic for the knowledge base of for EAP practitioners. We find this extremely useful and should guide us when thinking about pedagogy. Especially lacking in EAP is the sociological orientation highlighted in the slide. The other two areas are better covered. However, we would suggest that something is missing from this. There's perhaps a blind spot. Knowledge of disciplinary cultures and values is outward facing towards the disciplines and away from our own field. This needs to be augmented by an inward reflexive gauge, and this is not synonymous with reflection at all. In Bourdieu's terms, we need to adopt a reflexive socioanalysis of the field of EAP, a kind of combination of psycho and sociological analysis in order to objectify the conditions of knowledge production within EAP, the status, power, capitals and habitus of the actors within EAP, in order to understand why certain ideas and practices and pedagogies circulate, dominate and become doxa, the orthodoxies in which we all operate willingly or not. By reflecting on broader issues concerning EAP and practitioners, we conclude that concerted efforts are needed to orientate the structures and cultures of EAP centres towards enabling effective practitioner pedagogic development. The pedagogic task of understanding, operationalizing and teaching research-informed theories to meet students' multifarious academic needs is at the heart of EAP, and this deserves much more public scholarship-informed attention. So, what considerations of pedagogy tell us about the practitioner and the profession, and what can and should we do about this? We're finishing on a cliffhanger. There we go. Thank you.